The nightmare always began the same way. Mason Harker stood outside the frontier outpost, watching helplessly as flames consumed the wooden buildings. Screams echoed through the night. Among them, he recognized the voices of his wife and daughter, Eleanor and Abigail, trapped inside. In the dream, Mason always ran toward the burning structures, but his legs moved as if through molasses. The distance stretched impossibly. And there, silhouetted against the inferno, a figure moved. A man in a military uniform, brass buttons gleaming in the firelight, reaching into the flames. Mason jerked awake, a strangled cry dying in his throat. Sweat soaked his nightshirt despite the desert chill. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then reality settled back into place. His cabin, his ranch. 8 years since the Apache raid had taken his family. He sat up, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. The same dream, but something was wrong. The man in the uniform had been clearer this time. He'd seen the glint of an officer's insignia. A gunshot shattered the night silence. Mason was on his feet in an instant, reaching for the Winchester rifle he kept beside his bed. Another shot cracked the air, closer this time. He moved to the window, staying to the side as he peered into the darkness. The moon hung low over the Arizona desert, bathing the landscape in silver. His ranch stood isolated, miles from the nearest settlement, just as he preferred it. The perfect place for a man trying to outrun his memories. A third shot, a woman's scream. Mason stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. His eyes, trained by years as an Army scout, searched the darkness. Movement near the front gate caught his attention. A figure stumbling, then collapsing. Cautiously, Mason approached, circling wide. Years in Apache territory had taught him the value of caution. Ambushes weren't uncommon in these parts. The figure didn't move. Drawing closer, he saw it was a woman, face down in the dirt, blood soaking her side. He knelt beside her, turning her over gently. Her face was striking even in pain. High cheekbones, strong features, skin the color of burnished copper. She couldn't be more than 30. Her clothes were a mixture of settler and native, a calico skirt paired with moccasins and a beaded vest over a simple blouse. In the moonlight, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A tattoo on her arm, the mark of the Red Mountain Band of Apache, the same band that had raided the outpost where his family had been waiting for him, the same band that had killed his wife and daughter 8 years ago. Mason's finger tensed on his rifle. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. As he debated what to do, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Dark eyes, glazed with pain, met his. Through cracked lips, she whispered in broken English, "They killed him. They're coming." Her words hung in the night air. Then she lost consciousness again. In the distance, Mason heard the faint sound of hoofbeats. Whoever they were indeed coming. Decision time. Mason Harker had spent 8 years nursing his hatred for the Apache, building walls around what remained of his heart. He'd buried his wife and daughter, or what he believed were their remains, with his own hands. He'd sworn vengeance, then retreated into isolation when vengeance proved hollow. And now an Apache woman lay bleeding at his gate. "Not your night today," he muttered, lifting her. She was surprisingly light in his arms. Beside her on the ground lay a small leather medicine pouch and an intricately carved wooden box. He tucked them under his arm. Inside the cabin, he laid her on the bench near the hearth. The fire's glow revealed the extent of her injuries. A bullet had grazed her side, tearing through flesh but missing vital organs. She had other bruises and cuts, evidence of a beating. Mason moved efficiently, gathering clean cloths, water, and whiskey. He'd patched enough wounds in his time to know what to do. As he cleaned the wound, she stirred, her face contorting in pain. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "It hurts, I know." Her eyes flashed open, wild with fear. "Please," she gasped. "They killed Daniel." "Who killed Daniel?" Mason asked, continuing his work. "Men, 3 men, said he had gold." She winced as Mason applied whiskey to the wound. "He didn't. We barely had enough to eat." The wound wasn't deep, but it had bled enough to leave a trail. After cleaning and bandaging it, Mason checked her other injuries. Nothing life-threatening, though she'd been through hell. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. 3 riders approaching his ranch with purpose. Mason moved to the window. 3 men rode into his yard, spreading out as they dismounted. Their manner spoke of confidence and menace. Men who had done enough killing to stop caring. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. His shadow stretched across the dirt like a ghost. "Evening, gentlemen," he called. "Something I can help you with?" The largest of the three, a brute with a broken nose, spat in the dirt. "Looking for a woman, Apache breed. She came this way." Mason's expression remained neutral. "Haven't seen any Apache around these parts." The man with the broken nose exchanged glances with his companions. "Funny thing, her blood trail leads right to your gate." "Blood trails can be misleading," Mason replied. His finger rested lightly near the trigger of his rifle, especially in the dark. "She stole something from us," the third man said, a thin fellow with a face like a weasel. "Valuable property." "What kind of property?" "None of your concern," Broken Nose growled. "Just tell us where she is." Mason assessed the three men, armed, dangerous, and certain of their righteousness. Men like these wouldn't leave without what they came for, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill him to get it. "I suggest you boys move on," Mason said evenly. "Whatever business you have, it's not here." Broken Nose's hand moved toward his pistol. "We're not asking, old man." The first shot came from Weasel Face, but Mason had been anticipating it. He dove to the side as the bullet splintered wood where he'd been standing. Rolling to one knee, he fired twice in rapid succession. Weasel Face dropped, clutching his chest. The third man scrambled for cover behind the water trough, firing wildly. Mason ducked behind a barrel as bullets thudded into wood. Broken Nose charged the porch, shotgun raised. Mason waited until the last moment, then stepped out, firing at point-blank range. The big man's momentum carried him forward, crashing into Mason and knocking them both to the ground. Pain exploded in Mason's shoulder as they grappled. Broken Nose was bleeding badly, but still had fight in him. His hands closed around Mason's throat, squeezing. Mason's vision began to darken at the edges. He fumbled at his belt, fingers closing around the handle of his hunting knife. With the last of his strength, he drove the blade upward, under the ribs. Broken Nose's grip slackened. His eyes widened in surprise, then emptied as death claimed him. Mason pushed the body off, gasping for air. The third man was still behind the water trough. Silence stretched between them. "You can ride out of here alive," Mason called. "Or join your friends. Your choice, Kyle." A moment passed. Then the man stood slowly, hands raised. "Don't shoot. I'm leaving." "Drop your gun first." The man complied, his pistol thudding in the dirt. "Now who sent you?" Mason demanded. The man hesitated. "Fellow in town. Said the Apache woman's husband had found gold. Said we could have half if we brought back a wooden box she took." "This fellow have a name?" "Called himself Blackwood. Said he was with some mining company." Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Blackwood, tall man, military bearing, wears a black coat with silver buttons?" "That's him. Said he'd meet us tomorrow." The man's eyes darted nervously. "Listen, I didn't know about killing nobody. They just said we were recovering stolen property." "Get on your horse and ride out," Mason said coldly. "If I first see you again, I won't be so generous." The man wasted no time mounting his horse and galloping into the night. Mason watched until he disappeared, then turned his attention to the bodies. They would have to be buried, but that could wait until morning. Inside the cabin, the woman had regained consciousness. She sat up gingerly, her eyes widening at the sight of blood on Mason's clothes. "You're hurt," she said. "It's not my blood, mostly." Mason winced as he moved his shoulder. One of the men had gotten a lucky hit in during the struggle. "Your pursuers won't be troubling you anymore." Relief washed over her face, then suspicion. "Why did you help me?" A good question, one Mason wasn't entirely sure he could answer. He busied himself pouring 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. "Let's start with your name," he said, avoiding her question. "Nora. Nora Two Rivers." She sipped the whiskey, wincing at its burn. "My husband was Daniel Walker. They killed him this morning." "Because they thought he had gold?" Nora nodded. "Daniel worked a small claim outside town. Barely made enough to keep us fed. But he liked to talk in the saloons, said we'd strike it rich someday." Her voice caught. It was just talk. Mason noticed her glance toward the wooden box and medicine pouch he had set on the table. "What's in the box, Nora? What were they really after?" "I don't know," she admitted. It belonged to my father. Daniel kept it under a loose floorboard. When those men came, she closed her eyes, struggling against the memory. After they killed Daniel, they tore the cabin apart looking for gold. I grabbed the box and ran. I didn't know what else to do. Mason studied her. Either she was telling the truth or she was a very convincing liar. The tattoo on her arm troubled him. Red Mountain Band. The memories it evoked were still raw even after 8 years. Your husband was white, he observed. Not a question. Yes, not everyone approved. There was a lifetime of pain in those simple words. My mother was Apache. My father, Thomas Two Rivers, was a translator for the army. I grew up between two worlds, belonging to neither. Before Mason could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the silence once more. More than one rider this time, moving deliberately. Stay here, he ordered, grabbing his rifle. If things go badly, there's a trap door under the rug by the hearth. Small cellar beneath. Hide there. Mason stepped onto the porch for the second time that night, rifle ready. In the moonlight, he could make out 4 riders approaching. The lead rider's silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, straight-backed, military-bearing, even on horseback. Colonel Philip Blackwood. Mason hadn't seen him in 8 years, not since the days when Blackwood had commanded the military district that included the frontier outpost where Eleanor and Abigail had died, where Mason had served as a scout. The riders halted at the gate. Blackwood dismounted with the fluid grace of a man 20 years younger than his actual age. In his 50s now, his hair had gone fully gray, but his face remained largely unlined, his posture impeccable. Mason Harker, he'd called. It's been a long time. Colonel, Mason acknowledged, wasn't expecting visitors tonight, especially not twice in one evening. Blackwood approached, flanked by 3 men who hung back at a respectful distance. I heard gunfire earlier. Everything all right out here? Had some trouble with 3 men looking for gold. It's been handled. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. Those would be the Matthews brothers and their cousin. Unsavory sorts. Good riddance. He glanced at the bodies still lying in the yard. You always were efficient, Harker. What brings you out here, Colonel? Bit far from the fort. I'm no longer with the Army. Serve the county commission now. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. We received reports of an Apache woman in these parts, daughter of a known traitor. Thought I'd look into it personally, given your history with the Red Mountain Band. Mason's grip on his rifle tightened imperceptibly. What Apache woman would that be? Nora Two Rivers, daughter of Thomas Two Rivers, the translator who sold information to the Apache, leading to the attack on Fort Callahan. Blackwood's voice hardened. The attack that killed your family. The accusation hung in the air between them. Mason's face remained impassive, but his mind raced. He'd never heard this version of events. Thomas Two Rivers had been the translator attached to a scouting unit. A quiet, competent man. The idea that he'd betrayed them seemed far-fetched. Haven't seen any Apache around here, Mason said finally. Just some desperate men chasing rumors of gold. Blackwood studied him for a long moment. We'd like to search your property, Harker. Stolen property may have found its way here. You got a warrant, Colonel? I have the authority of the county commission. That's not the same thing. Mason didn't lower his rifle. Come back with proper paper, and I'll be happy to oblige. A flash of anger crossed Blackwood's face, quickly controlled. You are making a mistake, Harker. That woman is dangerous. A thief and quite possibly a murderer, like her father. I'll keep an eye out, Mason replied evenly. But for now, I'd appreciate if you and your men would move along. It's been a long night. Tension crackled between them. For a moment, Mason thought Blackwood would push the issue. Instead, the older man nodded curtly. Very well, I'll return tomorrow with the proper documentation. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing, Harker. If you do encounter the Two Rivers woman, be careful. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. With that cryptic warning, Blackwood mounted his horse and led his men away. Mason watched until they disappeared into the darkness, a sense of unease settling in his gut. As he turned to go back inside, something glinted in the dirt where Blackwood had stood. Mason bent to pick it up. A brass button, military issue, with an eagle emblem, the kind worn by senior officers, the kind that had gleamed in the firelight of his nightmare. Inside, Nora was standing by the window, watching warily. That was Colonel Blackwood, she said. It wasn't a question. You know him? I know of him. My father served under him before she trailed off, before everything happened. Mason set his rifle aside and poured himself another whiskey. The night's events had stirred up memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Your father, he said slowly. Thomas Two Rivers. Blackwood claims he betrayed the army, led the Apache to Fort Callahan. He looked at her directly. My wife and daughter were at that fort when it was attacked. Nora's eyes widened. That's a lie. My father tried to prevent the attack. He warned both sides, but no one would listen. She shook her head vehemently. Colonel Blackwood was the one who... A crash from outside interrupted her. Mason grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. One of the dead men's horses had knocked over a water barrel, spooked by the smell of blood. We need to bury those bodies, Mason said grimly. And then you need to tell me exactly what's in that box and why Blackwood wants it so badly. The rest of the night passed in grim work. Despite her injuries, Nora insisted on helping Mason drag the bodies to a shallow grave behind the barn. Neither spoke much as they worked. When they finished, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson. Back in the cabin, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both. Mason stoked the fire while Nora made coffee, moving with the careful precision of someone in pain, but determined not to show it. You should rest, Mason said, noting the pallor beneath her copper skin. After we talk. Nora sat at the table, pulling the wooden box toward her. Her fingers traced the intricate carvings, Apache symbols intertwined with what looked like a map. This belonged to my father, she explained. He left it with me before he disappeared 8 years ago. Said it contained important information. That if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe. And did you look inside? No, Daniel and we just kept it hidden. It was all I had left of my father. She hesitated. Until today, I never had reason to open it. Mason leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Well, 3 men are dead because of that box, and Colonel Blackwood seems mighty interested in it. I'd say that's reason enough. Nora nodded slowly. She tried the lid, but it didn't budge. It's locked. Mason examined the box. The lock was small but sturdy. I can break it open, but it might damage whatever's inside. Wait. Nora reached for her medicine pouch, withdrawing a small object wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Mason saw a small silver key. My father gave me this when I was a child, said it would open the door to the truth when the time was right. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked, and the lid opened with a soft creak. Inside was a folded piece of deerskin, covered in Apache symbols. Beneath it lay a sealed letter and half of a silver ring inlaid with turquoise. Nora's hands trembled as she unfolded the deerskin. It's a map, she said quietly. My father's map. Mason leaned closer. The map showed a terrain he recognized. The area around Eagle Rock, a distinctive formation about 2 days' ride east. But it included landmarks he had never seen marked on any army maps. What are these symbols? He asked, pointing to markings along what appeared to be a trail. Sacred places, Nora replied. This one means water spring. This is Medicine Cave. And this? She traced a symbol at the map's center. This means Valley of Souls, a sacred place to my people. Mason's attention shifted to the letter. The seal bore the initials TTR, Thomas Two Rivers. Nora broke it carefully and unfolded the yellowed paper. As she read, her face paled. What is it? Mason prompted when she didn't speak. It's about the attack on Fort Callahan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My father was trying to prevent it. Mason took the letter from her trembling hands. The handwriting was neat and precise, the English impeccable. My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I have not returned to you. What I am about to reveal may place you in danger, but the truth must be known. Colonel Blackwood has been planning to drive the Apache from the territory around Eagle Rock. He discovered gold there, but needed the land cleared before he could claim it legally. He has been secretly inciting both sides to violence. I discovered his plan when I translated documents not meant for my eyes. When I confronted him, he threatened you and your mother. I had no choice but to play along while seeking evidence. On the night of the attack on Fort Callahan, I tried to warn both the fort and the Apache war party, but I was too late. The slaughter had already begun. In the chaos, I managed to save a woman and her child, the wife and daughter of Scout Mason Harker, who had shown me kindness when others would not. I led them to a cave near Eagle Rock, planning to return for them once it was safe. But Blackwood's men captured me. They accused me of betraying the fort, using me as a scapegoat for the disaster Blackwood himself had orchestrated. I escaped, but was wounded badly. By the time I recovered enough to return to the cave, weeks had passed. The woman and child were gone. I found signs they had traveled east, toward the Valley of Souls. I gave the woman half of my silver ring as protection should they encounter Apache. I pray they found sanctuary there. The map with this letter shows the way to the Valley of Souls. The people there will help you if you show them the other half of the ring I now entrust to you. Blackwood must be stopped. He will not rest until he has the gold of Eagle Rock. Even if it means destroying the sacred valley and all who dwell there, I go now to gather evidence against him. If I do not return, the task falls to you. With all my love, your father. Thomas Mason read the letter twice, his hands shaking by the end. The implications were staggering. If Thomas Two Rivers was telling the truth, then Blackwood had orchestrated the attack that had supposedly killed Eleanor and Abigail. But there was more. According to the letter, his wife and daughter might not have died that night. They might have escaped with Thomas's help. The woman and child, Nora said softly. Your family? Mason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. 8 years. 8 years of believing they were dead, of mourning them, of hardening his heart against the world. The ring, he said finally. Let me see it. Nora handed him the half ring from the box. It was silver, intricately worked with a turquoise inlay. The stone continued halfway across the break, suggesting the missing half would complete the design. Memory stirred. After the attack, Mason had searched through the charred remains of the fort, looking for his family. He'd found 2 bodies in what had been their quarters, burned beyond recognition. But he'd identified them by a silver ring with turquoise inlay found among the ashes, a gift he'd given Eleanor on their wedding day. Or so he'd thought. I buried my wife with a ring like this, he said, his voice hollow. At least, I thought it was my wife. Nora's eyes widened in understanding. If my father gave his ring to your wife for protection, then who did I bury? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Mason stood abruptly, moving to a small chest near his bed. From it, he withdrew a leather pouch. Inside was a silver locket on a chain. He opened it to reveal a miniature portrait of a woman with auburn hair and gentle eyes, and a lock of golden hair. Eleanor and Abigail, he said quietly. If they're alive, if they've been alive all this time, the possibility was too overwhelming to contemplate. Hope was a dangerous thing for a man who had lived so long with grief. We need to find them, Nora said, determination in her voice. The Valley of Souls. It's where my father believed they went. It's where he would have gone after escaping Blackwood. Mason closed the locket, his decision made. Blackwood will be back tomorrow with men and warrants. We can't be here when he arrives. You believe me? Believe my father? Mason met her gaze. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know Blackwood lied about the attack, and I know I need answers. He glanced at the map. Eagle Rock is 2 days' hard ride from here. If we leave at noon, we can put good distance between us and Blackwood before he returns. As they prepared to depart, Mason found himself watching Nora. Despite her injuries, she moved with quiet efficiency, gathering only what was essential. There was a strength to her that reminded him of Eleanor, a resilience that had nothing to do with physical power. He still didn't fully trust her. The tattoo on her arm, the mark of the Red Mountain Band, was a constant reminder of all he had lost. But the possibility that his family might be alive, that the grief he had carried for 8 years might have been unnecessary, that possibility outweighed everything else. As Mason checked the horses in the barn, he made a discovery that confirmed at least part of Nora's story. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a small chest. Inside were gold nuggets, not a fortune, but enough to tempt desperate men. Daniel's secret, Nora said softly when he showed her. He never told me. Was going to surprise me, I guess. We should take it, Mason advised. It's rightfully yours, and we might need it. And they packed quickly and efficiently, food, water, ammunition, medical supplies. The wooden box and its contents went into Mason's saddlebags. The gold they distributed between them, hidden in various pouches and pockets. As noon approached, They prepared to depart. Mason took a last look around the ranch he had called home for 8 years. In a strange way, he felt no regret at leaving. The place had never truly been a home, merely a fortress where he had walled himself away from the world. As they mounted their horses, Nora winced, her hand going to her wounded side. "You sure you're up for this?" Mason asked. She met his gaze with determination. "I've endured worse. Let's go find our families." They rode east under the midday sun toward Eagle Rock and whatever truth awaited them there. Neither noticed the lone figure watching from a distant ridge, an elderly Navajo man with a weathered face and knowing eyes, following their progress with keen interest. What they also missed was a rider departing from the opposite direction. A young deputy Blackwood had positioned to watch Mason's ranch. The man spurred his horse toward town, eager to deliver the news of their departure and heading. Blackwood had been thorough in his preparations, having stationed watchers at strategic points throughout the territory. A network of informants and loyal men built over years of corruption and intimidation now served his obsessive quest. Back in town, Blackwood received the news with cold satisfaction. "East, you say? Toward Eagle Rock?" He spread a map across his desk, tracing the likely routes with a finger worn smooth from years of military service. "Send riders to these 3 points," he instructed, marking positions on the map. "And telegraph the outpost near Cottonwood Creek. If they cross the eastern ridge, I want to know immediately." The preparation was meticulous. Blackwood had spent years studying every trail and pass that might lead to the Valley of Souls. For him, this was not merely pursuit, but the culmination of nearly a decade's scheming. He would not leave anything to chance. The first day's ride passed in relative silence. Mason set a steady pace, mindful of Nora's injuries and the need to preserve the horse's strength for the journey ahead. They skirted the main trails, keeping to less traveled paths that would make them harder to track. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered arroyo. Mason built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden from view. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, both lost in their own thoughts. The desert night grew cold quickly. Nora wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, staring into the flames. In their flickering light, Mason noticed how the shadows accentuated the angles of her face, the quiet dignity in her bearing. "You should rest," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I'll take first watch." Nora looked up at him. "I was thinking about what your wife and daughter must have gone through, fleeing in the night, not knowing if you were alive or dead." Mason hadn't allowed himself to think that far. The possibility that they had survived the attack was still too new, too fragile to fully embrace. "Eleanor was always the strong one," he said quietly. "People saw her as this gentle schoolteacher, but underneath was steel. When we first married, we lived in mining camps, rough places. She never complained, never backed down." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Once saw her face down a drunk miner twice her size who was causing trouble at the school tent. Sent him packing with just her words and the look in her eyes." "And your daughter?" "Abigail." Just saying her name loosened something in his chest. 6 years old when it happened. Smart as a whip, curious about everything. Had her mother's eyes and smile, but my stubborn streak, according to Eleanor. Mason fell silent, the memories both sweet and painful. Then surprising himself. "What about you? Your husband? Daniel?" Nora's gaze returned to the fire. "Daniel was a good man, not in the easy way of some men, but in the way that matters, standing up for what's right, even when it costs him." She looked up at the star-filled sky. "He saw me when others looked through me, the half-Apache girl no one wanted to claim." "How did you meet?" "He was passing through the reservation. I was working at the agency store." Her voice softened with memory. "He kept coming back week after week, always needing something he'd forgotten to buy the time before. Finally, the store owner told him to either propose or stop wasting merchandise space." Mason found himself chuckling, the sound rusty from disuse. It felt strange, almost wrong to laugh after so many years of grim solitude. "We had 3 good years," Nora continued. "Not easy ones. People didn't take kindly to a white man with an Apache wife, but good." Her voice caught. "Daniel had dreams bigger than our little cabin, always talking about the claim, about the life we'd have someday." "The gold," Mason observed. "Yes, but I would have been happy with just him and the cabin. Her fingers absently traced the outline of her medicine pouch. My mother always said wealth isn't what you have, but what you can give away. The conversation lapsed into silence, each lost in private thoughts. Eventually, Nora settled into her bedroll while Mason kept watch, rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. The night passed without incident, and they broke camp at first light. The second day's journey took them into increasingly rugged terrain, the flat desert giving way to rocky foothills. Eagle Rock loomed in the distance, a distinctive formation that resembled a great bird of prey perched on the horizon. As they rode, Mason found himself studying Nora with new eyes. Despite her injuries, she rode with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime on horseback. There was a quiet competence about her that he respected, and a dignity that seemed at odds with the harsh life she had described. "Tell me about your father," he said as they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. "Thomas Two Rivers. I knew him as a translator, but not much more." Nora's face softened. "He was caught between worlds, like me, born to an Apache mother and a trapper father. The army valued his skills, but never fully trusted him." She filled her canteen before continuing. "He taught me to read and write both English and Apache, said knowledge was a bridge between worlds." "And your mother?" "Red Willow Woman. She was a healer of the Red Mountain Band. That's where I get this." She touched the tattoo on her arm. "When she died, I inherited her gift." Her gift. Nora hesitated, then reached for her medicine pouch. From it, she withdrew a small bundle of herbs. "Healing. My mother could ease pain, heal wounds, sometimes even cure sickness that white doctors couldn't touch." Mason's skepticism must have shown on his face. Nora gave a small, sad smile. "I know how it sounds, but there are things in this world beyond what we can easily explain." She returned the herbs to her pouch. "My mother taught me which plants heal, which harm, how to listen to the body's whispers before they become screams." She glanced at his shoulder where he had been injured in the fight with broken nose. "Your wound is bothering you. I can make a poultice that will help with the pain." Mason was about to refuse when a sharp twinge confirmed her observation. "How did you know?" "You favor that side when you mount your horse, and your eyes tighten slightly when you reach for anything." She dismounted gracefully. "It won't take long to prepare." Curious despite himself, Mason watched as Nora gathered certain plants growing along the creek bank. With practiced hands, she crushed the leaves, mixed them with water, and applied the resulting paste to a cloth. "Remove your shirt," she instructed. Mason hesitated, then complied. The bruise where Broken Nose had struck him had darkened to an ugly purple. Nora placed the poultice over it, her touch gentle but sure. Almost immediately, a cooling sensation spread through his shoulder, numbing the pain. Mason couldn't hide his surprise. "What is that?" "Just plants, willow bark, creosote, a few others." Nora bound the poultice in place with a strip of cloth. "Leave it until tonight. The pain will ease, and the healing will quicken." As she worked, Mason noticed a pattern of old scars across her back, visible where her blouse had shifted. Thin, parallel lines that could only have come from a whip. Nora caught his gaze and quickly adjusted her clothing. "An old story," she said quietly. "Not one for telling today." Mason nodded, respecting her privacy. Everyone in these territories carried scars, visible and invisible. He knew that better than most. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills of Eagle Rock. According to the map, the cave where Thomas had hidden Eleanor and Abigail should be on the eastern face, behind a stand of juniper trees. As they searched for the landmark, the hairs on the back of Mason's neck suddenly stood on end. Years of scouting had taught him to trust that feeling. "We're being watched," he said softly to Nora. She nodded almost imperceptibly, having sensed it too. "Apache?" "No." Mason scanned the rocky outcroppings above them. "Someone else." They continued forward, alert for any movement. The junipers came into view, a cluster of gnarled trees clinging to the rocky slope. Beyond them, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was the dark opening of a cave. As they dismounted and secured their horses, a figure emerged from behind a boulder. An elderly Navajo man with a deeply lined face and snow-white hair braided with eagle feathers. He leaned on a walking stick carved with symbols similar to those on Nora's medicine pouch. You seek the cave of spirits, he said in English, his voice like dry leaves rustling. Mason's hand moved to his rifle, but Nora stepped forward, making a gesture of respect. We seek family lost long ago, she replied. Who are you, grandfather? The old man studied her, then Mason. I am called Singing Arrow. I watch the paths to sacred places. His gaze lingered on Mason. I have watched you for many seasons, son of grief. Your journey circles back to its beginning. Mason felt a chill at the old man's words. You know me? I know of you, the army scout who lost his family, the man who buried strangers thinking they were his own. Singing Arrow pointed his walking stick toward the cave. The woman and child passed this way. 8 summers passed. Hope flared in Mason's chest. They were alive? You saw them? Singing Arrow nodded. The translator brought them here. When he did not return, they continued east to the Valley of Souls. And my father? Nora asked urgently. Thomas Two Rivers. Did you see him again? The old man's expression grew solemn. He returned, wounded in body and spirit. He sought the one who betrayed the fort, the one who wears a black coat with silver buttons. Blackwood, Mason breathed. 2 summers passed, your father walked this path again, Singing Arrow told Nora. He said he had found what he sought and was going to find you. I have not seen him since. Nora's face fell. After 8 years of absence, her father had tried to find her, only to disappear once more. Singing Arrow reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object, a medicine pouch similar to Nora's but adorned with different symbols. For you, he said, offering it to Mason, a gift from one who watches. Mason accepted it hesitantly. What is it? Protection, healing. The path ahead is dangerous. The old man's eyes held a wisdom that seemed to transcend age. The Valley of Souls does not welcome those with darkness in their hearts, but for those who seek healing, it offers sanctuary. He turned to go, then paused. The keeper of the flame awaits you in the valley, son of grief. She has not forgotten. Before either could question him further, Singing Arrow disappeared among the rocks with surprising agility for one so aged. Mason and Nora exchanged bewildered glances. Who was that? Mason asked. A medicine man, I think, but not Apache. Nora examined the pouch he had given Mason. These are ancient symbols of healing. Rare to see them given to an outsider. Mason tucked the pouch into his shirt. Let's check the cave. Daylight's wasting. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing them to proceed single file. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they saw that the cave extended back about 30 feet before ending in a smaller chamber. Ancient petroglyphs adorned the walls, figures of animals, humans, and symbols whose meanings were lost to time. In the smaller chamber, Mason found what he was seeking, initials scratched into the rock wall, E.H. and A.H. Eleanor and Abigail Harker, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His fingers traced the crude letters. They were here. Look, Nora called from deeper in the chamber. She had found a small niche in the wall covered by a flat stone. Behind it was a space that contained a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but preserved in the dry cave air. With trembling hands, Mason unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's flowing script that had once penned love letters and shopping lists with equal care. My dearest Mason, if you are reading this, then by some miracle you have found our sanctuary. Thomas Two Rivers saved us from the raid and brought us here. But we cannot stay. The army is hunting him as a traitor, and we will travel with him to the Valley of Souls, where he says we will be safe among his people. I pray daily that you survived and will find this message. Know that Abigail and I think of you constantly. She speaks of you every day, refusing to believe you won't come for us. Follow the rising sun from Eagle Rock for 2 days, and you will find the entrance to the valley. Look for the 3 standing stones. We will wait for you there as long as we can. All my love, Eleanor. The letter was dated just 3 days after the raid, 8 years ago. Mason stared at the paper, emotions warring on his face. Joy that they had survived, anguish at the years lost, hope that they might still be waiting, fear that they had long ago given up and moved on. Nora placed a gentle hand on his arm. They survived, Mason. They made it this far. He nodded, carefully refolding the letter and tucking it inside his shirt, close to his heart. Let's see if they made it the rest of the way. As they emerged from the cave, the sound of distant gunfire shattered the afternoon silence. Mason's hand went to his rifle as he scanned the horizon. Riders coming from the west, he said grimly. At least 6 of them. Nora shielded her eyes against the setting sun. Blackwood? Most likely. He must have followed our trail from the ranch. Mason quickly assessed their options. There was no time to flee. The riders would easily spot them on the open terrain. Returning to the cave would trap them with only one exit. Up there, he decided, indicating a rocky outcropping above the cave entrance. We'll have the high ground and cover. They scrambled up the steep path, leading the horses as far as they could before tying them in a sheltered spot. Then they continued on foot to the outcrop winding, which provided both concealment and a clear view of the approaching riders. Through his field glasses, Mason confirmed his fears. Blackwood, he reported grimly, and his deputies, plus 2 others I don't recognize. How did they find us so quickly? They must have been watching the ranch, Mason said grimly. Blackwood suspected I was hiding something when I refused the search. And Eagle Rock, he gestured toward the distinctive formation. It's the most obvious landmark in the territory. Once they found my trail heading east, they knew exactly where we'd go. And these mountains have always been Apache territory, Nora added. If Blackwood's been searching for the Valley of Souls for years, he'd have scouts watching all the approaches. Mason nodded. He's been planning this too long to leave anything to chance. The riders approached steadily, clearly tracking their path from the foothills. There would be no avoiding confrontation. What's the plan? Nora asked, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Mason checked his ammunition. We hold position, use the terrain to our advantage. Try to negotiate if possible. And if that's not possible? He met her gaze directly. Then we fight, but Nora, his voice softened, if things go badly, you need to run. Head for the valley. Find my family if they're there. She started to protest, but he cut her off. Promise me, the truth about your war father, about what happened at the fort. It needs to survive, even if we don't. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. I promise. The riders halted about 100 yards from the cave entrance, spreading out in a practice formation. Blackwood moved slightly ahead of the others, scanning the rocks above. Harker, he called out, his voice carrying in the still desert air. I know you're up there. You're trespassing on private property. Mason exchanged a glance with Nora. Private property. Eagle Rock had been unclaimed territory as far as he knew, traditional Apache land that had never been formally deeded. Show yourself and we can discuss this civilly, Blackwood continued. No need for things to get messy. Like they got messy for Daniel Walker? Mason called back, his position partially concealed behind a boulder. Blackwood's expression hardened. Walker was a thief. He stole more than gold. What's that supposed to mean? It means he took something that didn't belong to him. Blackwood gestured to 2 unfamiliar men. These gentlemen represent the Eagle Rock Mining Company. This entire area is their legal claim, including any caves and their contents. Mason's suspicions crystallized. Thomas Two Rivers had been right. There was no Eagle Rock Mining Company, just Blackwood and whatever scheme he had been running for the past 8 years. There is no Eagle Rock Mining Company, Blackwood, he called down. Just you and whatever scheme you've been running. The colonel's false congenial manner dropped away. Always were too smart for your own good, Harker. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He turned to his men. Flush them out, alive if possible, but I want that map. The deputies spread out, seeking cover as they prepared to advance up the slope. Mason signaled to Nora to move further back among the rocks, establishing a crossfire position. The first shots came from below, bullets ricocheting off stone near Mason's position. He returned fire deliberately, aiming not to kill but to force the deputies to keep their heads down. We're outnumbered, Nora observed, firing a careful shot that sent one deputy scrambling for better cover. But we have the high ground, Mason replied, and they don't know exactly where we are. The exchange of gunfire continued sporadically, neither side willing to expose themselves unnecessarily. But Mason knew it was only a matter of time before Blackwood's men worked their way up the slope. They needed a diversion. As if reading his thoughts, Nora pointed to a cluster of boulders perched precariously on the slope. If we could dislodge those, Mason saw the potential immediately. A rock slide would force the deputies to retreat, possibly creating enough confusion for an escape. "Cover me," he said, moving into position behind the largest boulder. Nora laid down suppressing fire, keeping the deputies pinned while Mason worked to dislodge the rocks with a long branch as a lever. The first boulder shifted, then tumbled down the slope, gathering momentum and triggering a cascade of smaller rocks. The deputies scattered, shouting warnings to each other. In the confusion, Mason spotted an opening. "Now," he called to Nora, "head for the horses." They ran in a crouch, using the continuing rock slide as cover. They had nearly reached the sheltered spot where they'd left the horses when a shot rang out, different from the deputies' weapons. A rifle, high-powered and precise. Mason felt the impact before he heard the sound. A searing pain tore through his left shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, but kept moving, Nora supporting him as they reached the horses. "You're hit," she said urgently, examining the wound. "Through and through," Mason gritted out. "I can ride." They mounted quickly, Mason fighting through waves of pain as he pulled himself into the saddle. Below, the deputies were regrouping, Blackwood shouting orders as they prepared to pursue. "This way," Nora urged, guiding her horse toward a narrow trail that climbed higher up the rocky slope, not the direction Blackwood would expect them to take. The trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horses, but it offered concealment as they climbed. Behind them, sounds of pursuit faded temporarily as the deputies searched the more obvious escape routes. "How did they find us so quickly?" Nora asked, glancing back at the ridge they'd just cleared. Mason adjusted his grip on the reins, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Blackwood's been planning this for years. I'd bet he has men watching every approach to these mountains." He paused, considering. "That third man back at the ranch, the one I let go, he probably rode straight to Blackwood. But to follow our exact trail—" "Signal mirrors," Mason said grimly, nodding toward distant flashes on the ridgelines. "Military technique. His men are positioned at high points, tracking our movement, signaling our location to the main party. He'd used the same techniques during his scouting days, and he likely has a local guide who knows these mountains better than we do." As if confirming his assessment, a single rifle shot echoed from a distant peak, followed by another answering from a different direction. Not aimed at them, but signals, markers of their position being relayed across miles of rugged terrain. "Blackwood left nothing to chance," Nora observed. "No," Mason agreed. "He's been hunting the valley too long. Our appearance just gave him the opportunity he's been waiting for." "Where are we going?" Mason asked, fighting to stay conscious as blood seeped through his hastily bandaged shoulder. "There's another way to the valley," Nora replied. "My father marked it on the map, a high pass that few know about." They rode through the afternoon, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. Mason's wound throbbed with each hoofbeat, but he refused to stop until they were well clear of Eagle Rock. Finally, as the sun began to set, they found a sheltered hollow between towering rock formations. "We'll rest here," Nora decided, helping Mason dismount. "I need to tend that wound properly." He didn't argue, which spoke volumes about his condition. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain was intense, and he knew the risk of infection was high in these conditions. Nora worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with water and whiskey from their supplies, then applying a paste of herbs she had gathered along the way. Her hands were gentle but sure, reminding Mason that she had likely tended many such injuries in her life. "You'll live," she pronounced finally, securing the bandage with a strip of clean cloth. "But you need rest." "We need to keep moving," Mason protested weakly. "Blackwood won't give up." "You'll be no good to anyone if that wound festers," she countered firmly. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue further, Mason leaned back against his saddle, the events of the day catching up with him. As darkness fell, Nora built a small, nearly smokeless fire, its warmth a comfort against the desert night's chill. "Why is Blackwood so determined to get the map?" Mason asked after a while, his voice low in the gathering darkness. Nora added a small branch to the fire, considering the question. "I think it's about more than just gold," she said finally. "The Valley of Souls is sacred to my people. There are stories, legends." "What kind of legends?" "They say the valley holds power, healing springs, plants that can cure any disease." She looked at him across the fire. "Most outsiders dismiss such tales as superstition. But my father believed, and perhaps Blackwood does too. Mason thought of Blackwood's determined pursuit, his years of searching. A man doesn't go to such lengths for something he doesn't believe exists. No, he agreed, he doesn't. I've been thinking about how they tracked us so efficiently, Nora said, prodding the fire with a stick. Back when my father was being hunted, he told me Blackwood had developed an elaborate system for tracking Apache across the territory. Relay stations, informant networks in the settlements, even scouts from rival tribes. Mason nodded grimly. Makes sense. As military commander, he had the resources to establish such a network. When he moved to the county commission, he probably maintained it through less official channels. The riders we saw today, they weren't just following our trail, they knew where we were headed. Blackwood studied this region for years, Mason concluded, probably interviewed every trader, trapper, and drunk who claimed to have seen the Valley of Souls. He's been waiting for someone to lead him there. He looked at Nora. We did exactly what he expected. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows across the rock walls surrounding them. Above, stars emerged in a sky untouched by human lights, a vast celestial canvas stretching to infinity. Mason thought of Blackwood's determined pursuit, his years of searching. A man doesn't go to such lengths for something he doesn't believe exists. No, he agreed, he doesn't. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows across the rock walls surrounding them. Above, stars emerged in a sky untouched by human lights, a vast celestial canvas stretching to infinity. You should try to sleep, Nora suggested. The herbs will help with the pain. Mason nodded, the exhaustion of the day pulling at him. But as he settled back, another thought occurred to him. Blackwood had two men with him, men claiming to represent some mining company. Did you recognize either of them? Nora shook her head. No, but something about the younger one seemed familiar. The way he moved. I noticed that too, Mason murmured, his eyes growing heavy. Almost like he was military or law enforcement. As sleep claimed him, Mason dreamed of Eleanor and Abigail, not as he'd last seen them, but as they might be now, older, changed by time and circumstance. In the dream, they were waiting for him in a green valley, sunlight streaming around them. He tried to reach them, but the distance between them seemed to stretch endlessly. Mason awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented. The fire had burned down to embers, and Nora was gently shaking his uninjured shoulder. Riders, she whispered, moving along the valley floor. Fully alert now, Mason carefully sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he could make out torches in the distance, methodically working their way along the base of the cliffs. They're searching every possible trail, he observed. Blackwood's determined. We should move while it's still dark, Nora suggested. The high pass isn't far, and they won't expect us to go higher rather than descending. Mason nodded agreement, though the prospect of more riding with his injured shoulder was unappealing. They broke camp quickly and silently, erasing all signs of their presence before mounting up. Nora led the way, following a trail so faint it was barely visible even to Mason's experienced eyes. They climbed steadily as the eastern sky began to lighten, revealing a landscape of breathtaking beauty. Rugged peaks, deep canyons, the desert floor spreading out below them like a vast copper sea. By full daylight, they had reached the pass, a narrow gap between towering rock formations that marked the highest point of their journey. On the other side, according to the map, lay the path to the Valley of Souls. Nora halted at the summit, gazing eastward with an expression of wonder. Mason drew alongside her, following her gaze to the vista before them. Below, nestled among the mountains like a hidden jewel, lay a valley of unexpected green, a stark contrast to the desert that surrounded it. A stream wound through its center, fed by springs that must originate deep within the earth. Trees lined the watercourse, and even from this distance, Mason could make out patches of color that suggested wildflowers. The Valley of Souls, Nora breathed, her voice filled with reverence. My father's people have guarded this place for generations. As Mason stared at the valley, a movement caught his eye, a thin spiral of smoke rising from a cluster of structures near the far end. People, he observed, pointing to the smoke. Someone is living in the valley. Nora nodded. The letter said Eleanor and Abigail went with my father to his people. This must be where they came. Hope and apprehension warred in Mason's chest. After 8 years of believing his family dead, after the long journey and the confrontation at Eagle Rock, they might be just hours away from reunion or from final confirmation that they were truly gone. There's only one way to find out, he said, gathering his resolve. As they prepared to descend into the valley, a glint of metal on the trail behind them caught Mason's attention. He turned, scanning the path they had traveled, and spotted movement among the rocks, sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel. "We've got company," he warned. "Blackwood must have guessed our route." Sure enough, several riders were visible now, making their way carefully up the trail toward the pass. They were still a good distance away, but gaining steadily. "We need to move," Nora urged. "Once we're in the valley, we'll have the advantage. My father's people will help us." Mason wasn't so sure. Thomas Runningwater's people might welcome Nora, but an ex-Army scout who had once hunted Apache? That was another matter. Still, they had little choice. Blackwood and his men were behind them, and the valley offered their only hope of sanctuary. They urged their horses forward, beginning the descent along a trail that wound down the eastern face of the mountain. The path was steep but passable, and they made good progress despite Mason's injury, which throbbed with renewed intensity after the night's rest. As they neared the valley floor, the vegetation grew increasingly lush, juniper giving way to cottonwood and willow along the stream banks. The air changed too, carrying scents of water and growing things instead of desert dust. Mason kept a wary eye on the trail behind them, but the rocky terrain made it difficult to track their pursuers' progress. They might have hours of lead time or minutes. There was no way to be sure. "Look," Nora pointed ahead, where the trail widened into a proper path. 3 standing stones, just like in Eleanor's letter. Indeed, 3 tall monoliths stood like sentinels flanking the path, their surfaces carved with ancient Apache symbols. Beyond them, the path continued toward the cluster of structures they had spotted from above. A small settlement of traditional wickiups mixed with more permanent wooden buildings. As they passed between the standing stones, Mason felt a strange sensation, a shift in the air, a change in pressure, as if they had crossed some invisible boundary. From Nora's expression, she felt it too. "The valley is protected," she said simply, as if that explained everything. They rode toward the settlement at a measured pace, not wanting to appear threatening. As they drew closer, figures emerged from the buildings, men and women dressed in a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and adapted settler garments. Nora called out in Apache, her voice clear and carrying across the intervening space. A murmur ran through the gathered people, and an elderly woman stepped forward. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair woven with beads and feathers. She carried herself with the unmistakable authority of a leader. "I am Spotted Owl," she announced in accented but clear English. "Who comes to the Valley of Souls?" Nora dismounted, approaching with proper respect. "I am Nora Two Rivers, daughter of Thomas Two Rivers, who once guided for the white soldiers." The old woman's eyes widened slightly. "Thomas Runningwater's daughter." She studied Nora's face carefully, then nodded in recognition. "Yes, I see him in you. He spoke often of his daughter." "My father," Nora's voice caught. "Is he here? Is he alive?" Spotted Owl's expression softened. "He lived among us for many years after bringing the white woman and child to safety, but he left 2 summers ago to find you. We have not seen him since." This news hit Nora visibly. Hope raised and dashed in the space of moments. Her father had been alive all these years, had even set out to find her, but was now lost again. Mason dismounted carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and stepped forward. "The white woman and child," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning within. "Are they still here?" Spotted Owl turned her penetrating gaze on Mason. "Who asked for them?" "My name is Mason Harker. The woman is my wife, Eleanor. The child, my daughter, Abigail." A ripple of reaction passed through the gathered people. Spotted Owl studied Mason intently, as if measuring his worth, his truth. "The woman called Eleanor lives among us still," she said finally. "The child has grown into a young woman. They believed you dead, as you believed them." The world seemed to tilt beneath Mason's feet. They were alive. After 8 years, after all the grief and loss and lonely nights, they were alive. Where, he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Spotted Owl turned and gestured toward a woman who had been standing at the back of the gathered people. She stepped forward hesitantly, her face partly hidden by a shawl. As she drew closer, she lowered the covering, revealing features Mason had thought he would never see again, except in dreams and faded photographs. Older now, lines at the corners of her eyes, her once auburn hair streaked with gray, but unmistakably Eleanor. She stopped a few paces away, staring at him as if he were a ghost. Mason? Her voice was exactly as he remembered, though rough with emotion. Eleanor. He took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. I thought you were dead. I found bodies at the outpost. Your ring. Thomas gave me his ring, she explained, her eyes never leaving his face. For safe passage if we encountered Apache. The bodies, they must have been others. I buried strangers, Mason finished, thinking they were you and Abigail. Eleanor's hand reached up, tentative, to touch his face. You're real, she whispered. All these years I prayed you had survived, that you would find my message. But as time passed, I only found it yesterday, Mason explained. At Eagle Rock. I never knew to look before. A sound behind Eleanor made them both turn. A young woman stood there, tall and slender, with blonde hair braided in Apache style. She wore a mixture of settler and native clothing, and her eyes, Mason's eyes, were wide with disbelief. Abigail, Mason breathed, hardly daring to believe. The girl, no, young woman now, took a hesitant step forward. Father? The word was uncertain, testing. Mason opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Abigail moved into them. He held her gently, aware of how strange he must seem to her. A father returned from the dead, a man she barely remembered. You've grown so much, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Last time I saw you, you barely reached my waist. Mother kept your memory alive, Abigail replied, her voice muffled against his chest. She told me stories every night so I wouldn't forget. Eleanor joined them, completing the circle. For a long moment they stood together, a family fractured by tragedy and reunited by something that felt very much like miracle. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. Mason turned sharply, pain lancing through his injured shoulder at the sudden movement. In the distance, riders were descending the trail from the pass, Blackwood and his men, moving fast now that they had spotted the settlement. They followed us, Nora said urgently. Blackwood, Spotted Owl's expression darkened. The one who seeks the valley's secrets. He has tried before to find us. He won't stop, Mason warned. He believes there's gold here, or something even more valuable. The old woman nodded grimly. There are things in this valley worth more than gold to those who understand their value. She turned to the gathered people, issuing rapid instructions in Apache. The settlement burst into activity, women gathering children, men readying weapons. It was clear they had prepared for this possibility. You brought this danger to us, Spotted Owl said, not accusingly but as a statement of fact. Yes, Mason acknowledged, and I'll help you face it. Eleanor gripped his arm. Mason, your shoulder, you're injured. It's nothing, he said, though the pain belied his words. Blackwood won't stop until he gets what he wants. And what he wants is this valley. Spotted Owl considered Mason thoughtfully, then nodded. We will defend our home together. She led them toward the largest structure in the settlement, a building that appeared to serve as some kind of meeting place or council house. Inside, illuminated by shafts of sunlight from above, was a sight that made both Mason and Nora catch their breath. Along one wall stood a series of clay pots, each sealed and marked with symbols. Spotted Owl approached these reverently. These contain seeds, she explained, seeds of plants that heal wounds that would otherwise fester, cure diseases that would otherwise kill, plants that grow nowhere else but here in soil watered by the springs of the Valley of Souls. She moved to another section of the room where clear vessels held water that seemed to glow with an inner light. And this, water from the sacred springs, it carries minerals found nowhere else, minerals that strengthen the body and clear the mind. Nora stared in wonder. This is what my father protected. Yes, Spotted Owl confirmed. Not gold, but life itself, more valuable than any metal. Blackwood learned of these things from a dying man who had once visited the valley. He has sought them ever since, not to help others, but to sell to the highest bidders. Mason understood now the depth of Blackwood's obsession. Such medicines would indeed be worth fortunes, especially if they could be controlled by one man. "How do we stop him?" he asked. Spotted Owl's weathered face set in determined lines. "We protect what is ours, as we always have." Outside, the riders were drawing closer. The time for reunion and revelation was over. Now came the moment for defense, for protecting not just a hidden valley, but a legacy of healing and hope that extended far beyond its boundaries. Mason turned to Eleanor and Abigail, torn between joy at finding them and fear of losing them again. "Stay inside, away from the fighting." Eleanor's expression was resolute. "We've survived 8 years among the Apache, Mason. We're not helpless." She held up a rifle, handling it with obvious familiarity, "and we won't be separated again." Abigail stood beside her mother, equally determined. "This is our home too, Father. We'll defend it." Mason recognized the stubborn set of their jaws. His own determination reflected back at him. Pride mingled with concern, but he nodded acceptance. They were not the same people he had lost 8 years ago. They had grown, adapted, become stronger. Together, the reunited family joined Nora, Spotted Owl, and the people of the valley as they prepared to make their stand against Blackwood and his men, to protect not just a place but a future. Blackwood and his men reached the edge of the settlement, reining in their horses at the sight of the Apache defenders arrayed before them. Spotted Owl stood at the center, flanked by Mason and several tribal warriors. Women and older children formed a second line of defense, including Eleanor and Abigail, who stood ready with rifles. Nora positioned herself near Spotted Owl, her expression resolute. The colonel dismounted casually, as if arriving for a social call rather than an armed confrontation. His deputies remained on horseback, hands hovering near their weapons. "Quite the welcoming committee," Blackwood observed dryly. "I'm touched." Spotted Owl stepped forward. "You are not welcome in this valley, Blackwood. Turn back." The colonel ignored her, focusing instead on Mason. "Harker, I see you found what you were looking for." His gaze shifted to Eleanor and Abigail. "Mrs. Harker, I presume, and the daughter. Touching reunion. Hate to interrupt." "Leave, Blackwood," Mason said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man with nothing left to lose. "There's nothing for you here." Blackwood laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the valley's stillness. "Nothing? This valley is worth more than all the gold in California. The water alone could make a man rich beyond dreams." His eyes narrowed. "And we both know there's more than just water here." "The valley's gifts are not for sale," Spotted Owl declared. "They belong to all people, not to one man's greed." "Poetic," Blackwood sneered, "but outdated. Progress is coming, old woman. Mining companies, railroads, the future. Your people can adapt or disappear." He turned to his deputies. "Secure the settlement. Anyone who resists," his hand moved to his gun, "deal with them." The deputies began to spread out, but before they could advance, a high-pitched whistling sound cut through the air. From the surrounding cliffs, dozens of Apache warriors appeared, bows drawn and rifles aimed. Blackwood's men froze, suddenly aware of their vulnerability. "You're outnumbered, Blackwood," Mason observed calmly, "and outmaneuvered. These people have defended this valley for generations. Did you really think they wouldn't be prepared?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the colonel's face. He scanned the cliffs, counting the warriors, calculating odds that were rapidly shifting against him. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," Mason continued. "Right away, forget you found this place." Blackwood's expression hardened. "You know I can't do that, Harker. I've spent too many years searching." "Then you've wasted those years." Nora stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "My father didn't hide this place to protect gold or riches. He protected it because it's sacred, because its gifts are meant for healing, not profit." "Your father," Blackwood spat the word. "Thomas Runningwater was a traitor to both sides. He betrayed the army, then his own people." "That's a lie," Nora countered. "He tried to prevent bloodshed. When he couldn't, he saved those he could, like Eleanor and Abigail." "And what about the others at the outpost?" Blackwood demanded, turning to Mason. "Did he save them too, or just your wife and child?" The question hit Mason like a physical blow. He had never considered the full implications of Thomas Runningwater's actions, that in saving Eleanor and Abigail, He had been forced to choose who lived and who died. He did what he could, Eleanor spoke up, stepping forward. The raid happened too quickly. He saved us, then returned for others, but by then, the buildings were burning. Blackwood scoffed. Convenient explanation. It's the truth, Eleanor insisted. I was there. You weren't. A tense silence fell over the confrontation. Blackwood's men remained poised for action, but clearly unnerved by the Apache warriors surrounding them. The outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, unexpectedly, Blackwood's demeanor changed. His shoulders sagged slightly, and something like pain crossed his features. You don't understand, he said, his voice lower now. I need what this valley holds. My wife, Catherine, she's dying. The doctors have given her months, maybe weeks. Nothing they've tried has helped. Mason exchanged a surprised glance with Nora. This was a side of Blackwood they hadn't anticipated. The healing waters, Blackwood continued. The medicines. They could save her. I've spent years searching, following every rumor, every tale. If healing is what you seek, Spotted Owl said carefully, why come with guns and threats? Why not ask for help? Blackwood's laugh was bitter. Would you have helped me, the white soldier who hunted your people, the man who claimed your lands for mines and settlements? We do not refuse healing to those who need it, Spotted Owl replied, but we protect the knowledge of how to use these gifts. They cannot be taken, only given. For a moment it seemed Blackwood might relent. Then his face hardened once more. I don't have time for your superstitions and rituals. Catherine needs real medicine, and I'll have it, one way or another. His hand dropped to his pistol, but before he could draw, a single shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Blackwood's foot. Everyone froze, eyes searching for the source of the shot. From between two buildings emerged a man, Apache in heritage but dressed in a mixture of native and settler clothing. His hair was streaked with gray, his face weathered by years and hardship, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. In his hands, he held a rifle still smoking from the shot. Father, Nora whispered, disbelieving. Thomas Runningwater stepped into the clearing, his rifle trained steadily on Blackwood. 8 years I've been hunting you, Blackwood, he said, his English perfect despite a slight accent. 8 years since I learned it was you who ordered the attack on my people, using the outpost as an excuse. Blackwood clutched his chest, face twisted with surprise and rage. You have no proof. I have this. Thomas Runningwater pulled a folded paper from his shirt. Your orders to Captain Reynolds, the ones that never made it into official records. The ones that specifically called for elimination of all Apache in the region, regardless of peace treaties. Mason stared at Thomas Runningwater, pieces falling into place. You've been tracking Blackwood all this time. Thomas Runningwater nodded. After bringing Eleanor and Abigail to the valley, I returned to find evidence of what really happened. The trail led to Blackwood and his secret mining interests in Apache territory. He wanted the land cleared. He looked at Mason. The raid gave him the excuse he needed to push for removal of all Apache. The oldest story in the West, Mason agreed grimly, but you found proof. Enough to hang him, Thomas Runningwater confirmed. Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound. You think anyone will take the word of an Apache over a decorated officer? Over a county commissioner? They'll listen to my— Oh, a new voice joined the confrontation. One of Blackwood's deputies stepped forward, removing his hat. Marshal Victor Holloway, Territorial Authority. I've been investigating Commissioner Blackwood for 6 months on suspicion of corruption and multiple murders. Blackwood's face drained of color. Williams, you're a federal marshal? Deputy Williams was a convenient identity to get close to you, Holloway confirmed with a slight smile. You never did bother to check my credentials too carefully, just assumed I was another hired gun, willing to look the other way for the right price. The man nodded. Your reputation reached all the way to Washington, Blackwood. Too many dead homesteaders. Too many coincidental Apache raids on land you later claimed for mining rights. He turned to the other deputies. Lower your weapons, men. This is over. For a moment it seemed Blackwood might order his men to fight anyway, but the odds were overwhelming. Apache warriors on the cliffs, the settlement defenders, and now betrayal from within his own ranks. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Secure him, Marshal Holloway ordered the remaining deputies, who moved to disarm their former boss. Thomas Running Water lowered his rifle, finally turning his full attention to Nora. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the distance of years. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "My Nora." She ran to him then, crossing the space between them in seconds, throwing herself into his arms. He embraced her tightly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed against his chest. "All these years." "I never stopped looking for you," he assured her. "When I heard about your marriage to Daniel Walker, I was trying to reach you. But by then Blackwood had recognized my name on the registry inquiries. He sent men after me." "Daniel is dead," Nora said, her voice catching. "They killed him, looking for the map." Thomas Running Water closed his eyes briefly in pain. "I am sorry, daughter. So much loss because of one man's greed." As the deputies secured Blackwood and the immediate threats subsided, the defenders began to relax. Spotted Owl approached Thomas Running Water, the two clasping forearms in greeting. "You returned to us at last, brother," the elder said, "and you bring your daughter as you promised." "And justice," Thomas Running Water added, glancing toward the captured Blackwood. Marshal Holloway approached Mason, who still stood protectively near Eleanor and Abigail. "Mr. Harker," he said, extending his hand, "your reputation preceded you as well, though in a different way. Your service record is exemplary." "That was a long time ago," Mason replied, shaking the offered hand nonetheless. "Perhaps," Holloway acknowledged, "but we could use men like you in the territorial authority, men who understand both worlds." He glanced meaningfully at Eleanor and Abigail, who had adapted to life among the Apache, and at Thomas Running Water, who moved comfortably between cultures. "I'm not looking for a badge," Mason said firmly. "Think about it," Holloway suggested. "The territory is changing. We need peacemakers more than gunfighters now." As the marshal moved away to organize the departure of Blackwood and his men, Eleanor slipped her hand into Mason's. "He's right, you know," she said softly. "You were always more peacemaker than fighter, even if you didn't see it yourself." Mason looked down at her, still marveling at her presence. "All I want now is time with you and Abigail. 8 years to catch up on." Abigail joined them, no longer the small child of his memories, but a young woman with his determination and her mother's grace. "We have time now, Father," she said. "All the time in the world." As Marshal Holloway led Blackwood away in handcuffs, a stunned silence fell over the valley. The confrontation had ended so abruptly that no one quite knew what to feel. Relief mingled with disbelief, joy with exhaustion. For Mason, the emotions were almost overwhelming. Rage at Blackwood's betrayal, gratitude for Running Water's intervention, and above all, the staggering reality of Eleanor and Abigail standing beside him, alive and well after 8 years of believing them dead. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He sat outside Eleanor's dwelling, watching the stars wheel overhead, his mind struggling to process all that had happened. The wound in his shoulder throbbed, a physical reminder of the day's events. But it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. Not pain, but something deeper. As if his heart, frozen for 8 years, was suddenly thawing, leaving him raw and vulnerable. "You should rest," Eleanor's voice came softly as she settled beside him, a blanket around her shoulders. "I'm afraid," Mason admitted, the words surprising even himself. "Of what?" "That I'll wake up and find this was all a dream, that you and Abigail will be gone again." Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness. "We're real, Mason. We're here." The next morning, life in the settlement began to return to a tentative normalcy. The warriors came down from the cliffs, families reunited, and the atmosphere gradually shifted from tension to cautious celebration. As the immediate threat receded, there was space, finally, for Mason, Eleanor, and Abigail to begin the delicate work of rediscovering each other. Marshal Holloway and the deputies prepared to depart with their prisoner, promising to return with official papers protecting the valley under new territorial agreements. That evening, a council fire was lit in the center of the settlement. The entire community gathered, along with their guests. Mason sat with Eleanor and Abigail, still adjusting to the miracle of their reunion. Across the fire, Nora sat beside her father, their heads bent close in conversation, making up for years of separation. Spotted Owl rose to address the gathering, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Today, we have witnessed the closing of a circle," she declared. "Thomas Running Water returns to us, bringing justice. The Harker family is reunited. The valley remains protected. She looked around the circle, meeting each gaze in turn. But circles do not truly close. They continue like the seasons, like life itself. She gestured to Mason and Thomas Running Water. These men once stood on opposite sides of conflict. Now they stand together as protectors of the same people, the same place. Her gaze moved to Eleanor and Abigail, then to Nora. These women have bridged worlds, carrying the best of each forward. The elder raised her hands toward the star-filled sky. This is the way forward, not separation, not conflict, but understanding. The joining of streams, the healing of old wounds. As Spotted Owl spoke, Mason felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for 8 long years. The grief, the hatred, the bitter loneliness, all transformed by the unexpected gift of reunion and second chances. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Mason watched as Eleanor showed Abigail a traditional Apache dance with some of the younger women. The firelight caught the silver strands in her hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening as she laughed. She was different from the schoolteacher he had married. Stronger, wilder in some ways, yet still unmistakably Eleanor. When she returned to his side, flushed and smiling, Mason took her hand. "You belong here," he observed quietly. Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "I thought I would feel torn between two worlds, but I don't. The valley became home because home is where family is." She studied his face. "But what about you, Mason? This place wasn't part of your life until now." "It's been part of mine through you and Abigail," he replied. "Through the 8 years you lived here, while I lived with ghosts." Eleanor leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "No more ghosts," she whispered. "Only futures now." The simplicity of that truth settled over them like a blessing. The past would always be there, the losses, the years apart, but it no longer defined them. What defined them now was the choice to move forward together. The following days brought significant changes. Marshall Holloway returned with official documents recognizing the Valley of Souls as protected territory under joint Apache and federal oversight. Thomas Running Water was named official liaison, his years of service to both worlds finally acknowledged. Blackwood was transported to the territorial capital to face trial. His crimes laid bare before judges who could not ignore the substantial evidence Thomas Running Water had gathered. The corrupt commissioner's network of associates was exposed, bringing justice to many who had suffered under his machinations. For the Harker family, the days were filled with reunion and rediscovery. Mason learned of Eleanor and Abigail's years in the valley, how they had adapted to Apache ways while maintaining their own traditions, how Abigail had grown from a frightened child into a confident young woman, fluent in 2 languages and cultures. "Will you stay?" Abigail asked her father one afternoon as they walked along the stream bank. Here in the valley, Mason considered the question carefully. "What would you want, Abigail?" She looked surprised at having her opinions sought so directly. I love it here," she admitted, "but I've also wondered about the world beyond. Mother has taught me from books, but there's so much I haven't seen." "Perhaps we don't have to choose," Mason suggested. "The ranch is still ours if we want it. But this place is part of your life now, part of who you've become. Maybe we can have both." Abigail smiled, reminding Mason so powerfully of the little girl he had lost that his breath caught. "I'd like that," she said. The days that followed brought significant decisions for both families. With Daniel gone, Nora considered what paths lay before her. Her mother's healing knowledge, combined with what she'd learned from the valley elders, had equipped her with skills rare in the territory. "The settlers fear what they don't understand about Apache medicine," she explained to her father one afternoon as they sorted herbs in the valley's council house. "But when they're sick or injured, that fear gives way to desperation." Running Water nodded, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision among the plants. "Knowledge kept too closely guarded withers like a root cut from soil," he said. "But scattered carelessly, it can become a weapon." "There must be a middle path," Nora insisted. "Perhaps that is yours to forge," her father suggested, "neither hiding our ways nor surrendering them, but teaching those worthy to receive them." The idea resonated beyond Nora's personal choice. The valley itself, so long isolated from the outside world, now faced similar questions. Complete separation had preserved its sacred knowledge through generations of conflict. But perhaps the coming era called for selective opening, carefully managed connections rather than impenetrable barriers. When Marshall Holloway suggested a formal commission on traditional medicine that would include running water as co-chair, it seemed like the first step toward that new approach. The Valley's gifts would remain protected, but pathways would open for their responsible sharing with a wider world. One evening, a week after the confrontation with Blackwood, Mason found Nora sitting alone by the council fire, staring into the flames with a contemplative expression. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She looked up, smiling in welcome. "Please do." Mason settled beside her, his wounded shoulder healing well under the care of the Valley's medicine. For a while they sat in companionable silence, watching the fire dance. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Mason said finally. "For you and your family?" Nora asked. "For all of us." He turned to face her. "You saved my life, Nora. Not just at Eagle Rock, but before that, when you arrived at my ranch. I was barely living, just existing day to day." She shook her head. "You saved me first." "Maybe we saved each other," Mason acknowledged, "and now we both have a chance to build something new." He hesitated, then continued. "Eleanor and I have been talking. The ranch is large enough for two families. If you and your father wanted a place beyond the valley, sometimes a foothold in the other world, there would be a home for you there." Nora's eyes widened in surprise. "You would offer that after everything between our peoples?" "Because of everything between our peoples," Mason corrected. "It's time to heal old wounds, not just for us, but for others who will come after." Tears shimmered in Nora's eyes, reflecting the firelight. "Thank you," she said simply. "I will speak with my father, but yes, I think we would like that very much." The decision wasn't just about a place to live, and they both knew it. It was about forging a new path, about demonstrating that coexistence wasn't just possible, but beneficial. The ranch could become a waypoint between worlds, just as the valley was a sanctuary of healing. "What about Marshall Holloway's offer?" Nora asked after a moment. "Will you accept a position with the territorial authority?" Mason smiled slightly. "I told him I'd consider it, but only on my terms. No badge, no official title, just a consultant when needed. Someone who can speak to both sides when conflicts arise." "A peacemaker," Nora observed, echoing Eleanor's words. "Something like that," he agreed. "The West is changing. The old ways of solving everything with guns and force, those days are ending. What comes next needs to be better for everyone." Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Thomas Runningwater joined them at the fire, nodding respectfully to Mason. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "Not at all," Mason replied, gesturing to the space beside them. "We were just discussing the future." Thomas Runningwater sat down, his movements graceful despite the years and hardships he had endured. "A worthy topic. The punt has claimed too much of our attention for too long." "I was telling Nora about our idea for the ranch," Mason explained, "as a place where your family would always be welcome." The Apache scout studied Mason thoughtfully. "Once we stood on opposite sides of a conflict, neither of us fully understood. Now you offer to share your home. The world has room enough for all of us," Mason said simply, "if we're willing to make space." Thomas Runningwater extended his hand, a gesture he had learned from white men, but imbued with the sincerity of his own people. Mason clasped it firmly, the handshake sealing more than just an agreement about property. It represented a new beginning, a healing of ancient wounds. "There is something I have carried for many years," Thomas Runningwater said, reaching into a pouch at his waist. "Something I think should return to you now." He withdrew a small object and held it out to Mason. In his palm lay a silver locket identical to the one Mason wore around his neck. "I found this at the outpost," Thomas Runningwater explained. "After I led Eleanor and Abigail to safety, I returned, hoping to save others. The buildings were burning, the attack over. This was lying in the dirt, as if lost in struggle or flight." Mason took the locket with trembling hands. "Eleanor had one just like it," he said, "a matched pair. I gave hers to her on our wedding day." "I did not know whose it was," Thomas Runningwater continued, "but I felt it was important, that one day it might help tell the story of what happened there. I have carried it ever since, waiting for the right moment." Mason opened the small silver case. Inside, where his own locket held Eleanor's portrait, this one contained a miniature painting of himself, younger and in uniform. It was indeed Eleanor's locket, lost during their desperate flight from the outpost. A circle completed, Mason murmured, closing his hand around the precious object. Thank you for keeping it safe all these years. Thomas Runningwater nodded. Some things are meant to return home, no matter how long the journey. Later that night, Mason gave the locket back to Eleanor, watching as tears filled her eyes at the sight of the treasure she had thought lost forever. She immediately placed it around her neck, where it belonged. Now we both carry each other close to our hearts again, she said, touching the matching locket that Mason wore. The simple act of restoration, a small silver locket returned after 8 years, seemed to symbolize everything that had happened. What was lost could sometimes be found. What was broken could sometimes be mended. The journey might be long and difficult, but home remained waiting. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Blackwood, preparations began for departure. Not a final leaving, but the first of what would become regular journeys between the valley and the outside world. Mason, Eleanor, and Abigail would return to the ranch to rebuild and expand it. Thomas Runningwater and Nora would accompany them to see the place that would become their second home. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright, the desert autumn bringing cooler temperatures and crystalline skies. The travelers gathered at the edge of the settlement, horses loaded with provisions and a few precious possessions. Spotted Owl conducted a blessing ceremony, her weathered hands moving in ancient patterns as she spoke words of protection and guidance. When she finished, she presented each traveler with a small clay vial. Water from the sacred spring, she explained, to remind you of the valley when you are away, and to heal any wounds you may encounter. She turned to Abigail, placing a special bundle in her hands. Seeds, she told her, the valley's gifts. You will plant these at your new home, creating a bridge between our worlds. Abigail accepted the responsibility solemnly, tucking the seed bundle carefully into her saddlebag. At 14, she stood at the threshold between child and woman, between the protected life of the valley and the wider world beyond. The seeds represented that transition, carrying forward the wisdom of one place into new soil. As final preparations were made, Mason found himself standing slightly apart, gazing across the valley that had changed everything. The morning light bathed the landscape in gold, highlighting the green ribbon of vegetation along the stream, the weathered stone of ancient cliffs, the simple beauty of the settlement nestled in the heart of the desert. Thomas Runningwater approached, standing beside him in contemplative silence for a moment. It is a view that stays with you, he observed finally, no matter how far you travel. Mason nodded. I've seen a lot of country, but nothing quite like this place. The valley changed me, Thomas Runningwater said, as it changed Eleanor and Abigail, as it has changed you, though your time here has been brief. How does one place hold such power? Mason wondered aloud. Thomas Runningwater smiled slightly. My people believe that certain places in the world stand at the intersection of realms, where the physical and spiritual worlds touch. The Valley of Souls is such a place. He gestured toward the mountains surrounding them. The barrier that protects it is not just stone, but something deeper. Mason thought of the strange sensation he had felt when passing between the standing stones, that shift in the air, that sense of crossing a threshold beyond the physical. Will it remain safe, he asked, now that more people know of its existence? The valley protects itself, Thomas Runningwater assured him. Those who come with greed or harmful intent will find it difficult to remain here. You saw how Blackwood's men grew uneasy, how their resolve weakened once they entered. And those like Marshal Holloway? Holloway respects what he does not fully understand, Thomas Runningwater replied. That is wisdom. He will help ensure the outside world's laws recognize the valley's special nature, even if they cannot comprehend it. Eleanor joined them, dressed for travel in a practical combination of settler clothing and Apache adaptations. The others are ready, she informed them. As they turned to join the waiting group, Eleanor slipped her hand into Mason's. Are you certain about this? She asked quietly. Leaving the valley. It's not leaving, Mason replied. It's expanding. The valley will always be here, Imama, a part of who we are now, but there's work to be done beyond these mountains. Eleanor squeezed his hand in understanding. Building bridges. Exactly. The small caravan set out as the sun climbed higher, following the eastern trail that would lead them back to the world beyond the valley. Spotted Owl and the other elders stood at the three standing stones, offering final blessings as the travelers passed between the ancient monoliths. As they crested the first rise, Mason turned in his saddle for a last look at the Valley of Souls. From this vantage point, he could see the entire sanctuary spread out below. The settlement, the stream, the sacred springs, all nestled within protective mountains, a place of healing that had mended more than physical wounds. "We'll return," Abigail said confidently, noticing her father's backward glance. "This isn't goodbye." Mason smiled at his daughter, seeing in her face the perfect blending of her mother's gentleness and his own determination, combined with something uniquely her own, a wisdom beyond her years forged in the crucible of survival and adaptation. "No," he agreed. "Not goodbye, just until next time." They rode on, leaving the valley behind, yet carrying its essence with them, in water vials and seed bundles, in memories and transformed hearts. The journey ahead would not be without challenges. The world beyond the mountains remained complex and often harsh, but they moved forward together, strengthened by what they had found in each other and in the sacred valley. 6 days later, they crested the final hill overlooking Mason's ranch. The familiar buildings stood against the desert backdrop, looking smaller somehow than Mason remembered. The cabin, the barn, the corral, all were intact, though showing signs of neglect during their absence. "Home," Mason said, the word feeling strange yet right on his lips. Eleanor studied the ranch thoughtfully. "It looks different than I imagined from your descriptions." "It's just a starting point," Mason explained. "We'll build it into whatever we need it to be." They rode down the slope toward the ranch, dust rising from beneath their horses' hooves. As they approached, Mason noticed signs that someone had been there during their absence. The water trough had been filled, a stack of firewood neatly arranged beside the cabin. The mystery was solved when Marshal Holloway emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. "Thought you might be arriving soon," he called. "Took the liberty of getting things ready." They dismounted in the yard, stretching travel-stiff muscles. Holloway approached, extending his hand first to Mason, then to Thomas Runningwater. "Everything in order at the valley?" he asked. Thomas Runningwater nodded. "Spotted Owl sends her regards, and her thanks for the official recognition." "Least I could do," Holloway replied. "The territorial governor was mighty interested in your evidence against Blackwood. Seems our former commissioner had friends in high places, friends who are now facing uncomfortable questions." "What happens now?" Mason asked. Holloway smiled slightly. "Change, whether we're ready or not." He looked around at the ranch. "I took the liberty of filing amended property records while you were away. The eastern section is now registered under Thomas Runningwater's name, as we discussed." Thomas Runningwater inclined his head in thanks. "Your assistance honors us." "Just doing what should have been done years ago," Holloway demurred. "The territorial charter always included provisions for native land rights. They were just conveniently ignored by men like Blackwood." As they unloaded the horses and settled in, the ranch gradually came alive again. Eleanor and Abigail explored every corner, connecting Mason's descriptions from their years apart with the reality before them. Thomas Runningwater and Nora walked the boundaries of their new section, already discussing where to plant the valley seeds, where to build their own cabin. That evening, they gathered around the hearth in Mason's cabin, now their shared home. The familiar space felt transformed by their presence, warm not just by the crackling fire, but by voices and laughter that had been absent for too long. Marshal Holloway joined them for the meal, bringing news from the territory and beyond. The world was indeed changing rapidly. Railroads pushing ever westward, new settlements springing up, the relationships between native peoples and settlers evolving through both conflict and cooperation. "We're standing at a crossroads," Holloway observed. "The old frontier is vanishing. What replaces it depends on people like you," he looked around the table, "who can see beyond the divisions of the past." After Holloway departed, promising to return with additional documentation and supplies, the two families remained around the fire. The conversation flowed easily, plans taking shape for expanding the ranch, for creating a place that would embody the bridge they sought to build. Later, as Eleanor and Abigail retired to the bedroom Mason had prepared for them, and Thomas Runningwater and Nora settled into the barn until their own cabin could be built, Mason stepped outside onto the porch. The desert night spread around him, stars blazing in the clear sky. From this vantage point, he could see for miles. The rolling landscape, the distant mountains that concealed the Valley of Souls, the vast open spaces that had once represented only emptiness and loss to him. Now he saw possibility in that same landscape. Room to grow, to build, to heal. The ranch was no longer just a place of exile, but the foundation for something new. Eleanor joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "What are you thinking?" she asked, leaning against him. "I never expected any of this," he admitted. "When Nora showed up at the gate that night, bleeding and half-conscious, I had no idea she would lead me back to you and Abigail." "The spirits work in mysterious ways," Eleanor said, a hint of teasing in her voice. She had adopted some Apache beliefs during her years in the valley, blending them with her own faith in a way that felt natural to her now. Mason smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Indeed they do." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens. "Make a wish," Eleanor whispered, an old tradition between them. Mason shook his head slightly. "I already have everything I could wish for," he said simply. Eleanor looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "So do I." Inside the cabin, Abigail was already asleep, safe under her father's roof for the first time in 8 years. In the barn, Thomas Runningwater and Nora rested, preparing for the work of building their new home alongside the Harkers. And beyond the mountains, the Valley of Souls continued its timeless existence, a sanctuary waiting for their return. The circle hadn't closed, it had expanded, embracing new possibilities while honoring what came before. As Mason and Eleanor returned inside, closing the door against the desert night, they carried with them the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Family once lost, now found. Wounds once raw, now healing. Souls once adrift, now anchored in love that had survived against all odds. Spring came to the ranch in a burst of unexpected color. The seeds from the Valley of Souls, planted in carefully prepared soil near the stream that ran along the property's edge, had sprouted into vibrant flowering plants unlike any native to the region. Their healing properties proved as potent here as in their original home, creating a living link between the two places. The months since their return had brought significant changes. Thomas Runningwater and Nora had built their cabin on the eastern section of the ranch, a comfortable dwelling that incorporated elements of both Apache and settler design. Mason and Eleanor had expanded the main house to better accommodate their family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen where they often gathered for shared meals. Abigail had flourished in her new environment, dividing her time between traditional education from books Eleanor had ordered from back east and practical knowledge taught by Thomas Runningwater and Nora. At 15, she moved confidently between cultures, serving as an informal ambassador when visitors came to the ranch. And visitors did come, with increasing frequency. Word had spread about the unusual partnership between the Harker and Thomas Runningwater families, about the medicinal plants they cultivated, about the peaceful coexistence they demonstrated. Some came seeking healing for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't address. Others came out of curiosity or skepticism. All were received with the same quiet hospitality. Mason had reluctantly accepted a more formal role with the territorial authority, serving as an advisor on matters involving relations between settlers and native peoples. His experiences and connections made him uniquely qualified to help resolve disputes that might otherwise have escalated into violence. Thomas Runningwater traveled regularly between the ranch and the Valley of Souls, maintaining ties with Spotted Owl and the community there. Sometimes Nora accompanied him, sometimes Abigail went along, continuing her education in Apache ways under the elders' guidance. Eleanor managed the ranch operations with quiet efficiency, having adapted quickly to the routines and responsibilities. Her years in the valley had taught her resilience and practicality that served her well in this new role. One warm afternoon in late spring, Mason sat on the perch mending a saddle while watching Abigail and Nora work in the medicinal garden. The easy companionship between them brought a smile to his face. The young woman his daughter had become, and the remarkable woman who had led him back to his family. Eleanor emerged from the house carrying a tray with glasses of cool water. She distributed them to the gardeners, then brought the remaining glass to Mason. Marshal Holloway is coming up the road, she informed him, sitting beside him on the bench. Looks like he has news. Indeed, the marshal's distinctive figure could be seen approaching on horseback, riding with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew the desert's rhythms. Holloway dismounted in the yard, removing his hat as Eleanor came forward to greet him. Mrs. Harker, he said respectfully, looking lovely as always. She smiled at the gallantry. Come in out of the sun, Marshal. You're just in time for refreshments. They gathered in the shade of the porch where Holloway accepted water gratefully. Abigail and Nora joined them, curious about the unexpected visit. I bring news, Holloway announced after quenching his thirst. Some good, some complicated. He removed a folded newspaper from his saddlebag. Blackwood's trial concluded yesterday. Guilty on all counts. Mason took the newspaper, scanning the headlines. 20 years in territorial prison, he read aloud. Justice after so long, Thomas Runningwater said quietly, having emerged from his cabin at the sight of the marshal's arrival. There's more, Holloway continued. The governor has established a commission to review all land claims in areas traditionally occupied by Native peoples, particularly those granted during Blackwood's tenure. He nodded to Thomas Runningwater. Your testimony and evidence were instrumental in making this happen. Will it make a difference? Nora asked, her voice carrying the skepticism born of long experience with broken promises. It already has, Holloway assured her. 3 fraudulent mining claims have been invalidated. The land returned to Apache stewardship. This was unexpected good news, suggesting that perhaps meaningful change was possible after all. And the complicated news? Mason prompted. Holloway's expression grew more serious. Word of the Valley of Souls has spread further than we might have wished. The territorial papers have published accounts, some accurate, some wildly exaggerated, about its healing properties. He handed Mason another newspaper. The headline read, Miracle Valley, Secret Apache Sanctuary Holds Cures for Deadly Diseases. The article beneath contained a mishmash of facts and fantasy, describing the valley in terms that made it sound like a mystical paradise where any ailment could be instantly cured. This is troubling, Thomas Runningwater observed, reading over Mason's shoulder. Such stories will attract those seeking easy miracles and those looking to exploit them. Exactly my concern, Holloway agreed. We've already intercepted 2 expeditions attempting to find the valley without authorization. One was a group of desperately ill people led by a self-proclaimed healer. The other was more concerning, representatives of a pharmaceutical company from back east, well-armed and determined. Nora shook her head in dismay. The valley's gifts aren't meant to be exploited or commercialized. They require knowledge, respect, proper preparation. We need to control the narrative, Mason said thoughtfully. Provide accurate information about what the valley's plants can and cannot do. Establish proper protocols for those seeking healing. That was my thought as well, Holloway nodded, which is why I brought this. He produced an official-looking document from his coat. The governor has authorized the establishment of a joint commission on traditional medicine, with members from both the territorial authority, federal, and tribal leadership. He's requested that Thomas Runningwater serve as co-chair. Thomas Runningwater looked surprised. This is unexpected. It's an opportunity, Holloway said, to ensure that knowledge is shared respectfully, that ancient wisdom is preserved while being made available to those in need. The proposal sparked an animated discussion among them. The idea of formally recognizing and incorporating Apache healing practices into territorial medical systems was revolutionary, fraught with challenges, but also rich with potential. It would mean more travel, Thomas Runningwater observed, more time away from the ranch. We would manage, Nora assured him. This is important work, perhaps the most important you could do. By the time Holloway departed, Thomas Runningwater had tentatively agreed to accept the position, pending consultation with Spotted Owl and the Valley Elders. The day's news had opened new possibilities, new pathways forward that none of them had anticipated. That evening, as they shared a meal around the outdoor fire pit, a custom borrowed from the valley that had become their own tradition, the conversation continued to explore the implications of Holloway's visit. Change comes whether we invite it or not, Thomas Runningwater observed, gazing into the flames. The question is whether we shape it or are shaped by it. The valley has remained hidden for generations, Abigail pointed out. Why is it becoming known now? Swift Hawk would say it is because the time is right, Nora replied. Because the world has need of its wisdom now. Or because we need the world, Mason suggested. Isolation preserved the valley during times of conflict, but perhaps connection is what's needed now. Eleanor, who had been listening thoughtfully, spoke up. When I first came to the valley, I saw it only as a refuge, a place to hide from danger. But over time, I understood it was more. It was a place of healing, yes, but also of learning, of growth. She looked around at their gathered faces, illuminated by firelight. Perhaps that's what we're building here, in our own way, not just a ranch, but another kind of healing place. Her words resonated with all of them. In the months since their return, the ranch had indeed become more than just a dwelling place. It had become a crossroads where different worlds met, where old wounds were healed and new connections forged. As the fire burned down to embers and stars filled the desert sky, Mason found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the night Nora had collapsed at his gate, bleeding and desperate, to the discovery of Eleanor and Abigail in the Valley of Souls, to this new chapter unfolding before them. Each step had seemed random, even cruel at times. Yet looking back, he could see a pattern emerging, a purpose he couldn't have imagined. Later, as he and Eleanor prepared for sleep in the quiet house, she voiced the question that had been forming in his mind. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "if all of this was meant to happen? If we were always supposed to find our way back to each other, to build this life?" Mason considered the question seriously. "I don't know about meant to or supposed to, Bo," he replied. "But I do believe that even in our darkest moments, possibilities for healing exist, waiting to be discovered." Eleanor smiled in the darkness, finding his hand with hers. "Like seeds," she murmured sleepily, "waiting for the right conditions to grow." "Like seeds," Mason agreed, thinking of the garden behind the house, where plants from the Valley of Souls now flourished in new soil. Outside, the desert night enfolded the ranch in stillness. In her room, Abigail slept peacefully, no longer haunted by memories of the raid that had once torn their family apart. In their cabin, Nora and Thomas Runningwater rested, father and daughter reunited against all odds. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the Valley of Souls continued its timeless existence, a sanctuary of healing that had extended its influence far beyond its boundaries through the lives it had touched. That night, as Mason lay beside Eleanor, listening to her steady breathing, he gazed through the window at the stars scattered across the desert sky. The same stars shone above the Valley of Souls, above the graves of the men he had once fought, above the changing territories where settlers and natives still struggled to find common ground. 8 years ago, he had buried what he believed were his wife and daughter, then buried his heart alongside them. He had retreated to a solitary existence, walled off from both pain and joy. Now those walls had crumbled, revealing not just the family he had lost, but an expanded circle that included Nora and Runningwater. Once strangers, now bound to them by shared purpose. The woman who had stumbled bleeding to his gate had brought not just her own wounds, but the key to healing his. The irony wasn't lost on him. That salvation had come bearing the mark of those he had blamed for his greatest loss. As sleep finally claimed him, Mason's last thought was not of the past scars, but of the garden behind the house. Tomorrow, he would help Abigail plant another row of seeds from the valley, tiny kernels of possibility nestled in desert soil, waiting to transform barrenness into bloom.